Hey everybody, this is Johnny Van Zandt from Leonard Skinner, and you're watching
Remarkable Essence
on American Hearts Radio, WEBTV.
And thank you for tuning in to another episode of Remarkable Essence. I am Don Causey, your host, and I'm so glad you decided to tune in this evening. We have another wonderful guest with us tonight, Dr. John Lipman, and he is the founder of Atlanta Interventional Institute. Tonight we're going to talk about fibroids. Do you have them? Do you know someone that has them? Definitely, we know a lot of women are dealing with fibroids in our society today. Approximately 1 million black women in the Atlanta area are dealing with fibroids. And so a lot of women have this issue. We wanted to talk about non-invasive measures. And so Dr. Lipman has put together lots of studies. He's done research, and he has a solution for you, so you don't want to miss this episode tonight. I'm so glad to have you here, Dr. Lipman.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on.
It's great.
And so we're just going to shoot the breeze. I know a lot of people out there have a lot of questions. For one, I know one thing that I told my husband tonight. I said, this is what I'm going to be talking about. And he's like, what are fibroids? So
what are fibroids?
Let's start off with that. What are fibroids?
Well, fibroids are the most common pelvic tumor in women. 1 of every 3 women of childbearing age have these benign tumors. They're not cancer, they're benign. Mm-hmm. But they can cause some very significant symptoms. It's the most common reason why women have heavy periods. Mm-hmm. They cause a lot of pelvic pain. They can cause increased urinary frequency and wake women up at night. So they're very common, and they commonly cause a lot of medical problems.
Wow. And so I know a lot of women, including my mom, women close to me that have dealt with this, and the pain I've heard can just be unbearable, like kind of like childbearing
Absolutely.
Type pain.
Fibroids are hard and firm, and you can feel them sometimes on physical exam. In fact, a gynecologist might describe a woman as a certain size pregnancy based on the enlargement of the uterus by these fibroids, and they're hard and firm, and that's how they cause their symptoms. Ones that are up against the lining can stretch the lining and cause these heavy gushing, flooding, horrible menstrual periods. Ones that are on the side of the uterus can press on pelvic nerves to cause pain in the pelvic area, in the back, buttock, hip, down the legs. And ones that are in the front of the uterus down low can press on the bladder to compress the bladder to cause the urinary frequency and wake women up at night.
Wow. And so I understand you studied at Georgetown University.
I did.
And so what made you pursue what was your journey like? Because I know a lot of people could be in medical school.
I did go to medical school at Georgetown, and then I went to Harvard for my radiology residency, and the Harvard hospital that I went to was Brigham and Women's Hospital. And it was there that I really began an appreciation for women's health and an interest in that.
Wow.
And then I went to Yale following that for my interventional fellowship, and then came to Atlanta about almost 25 years ago.
Wow, that's awesome. And so while you were doing your studies, what did you find when you were at Yale and when you were at Georgetown, at Brigham?
Well, like a lot of things in medicine get discovered by accident. When I came to Atlanta, I had some experience embolizing tumors, primarily of the liver. Okay. And so we would embolize these tumors to help people. But a very bright person got the idea of, well, why don't we embolize things that are not cancer? Because up until that point, we were embolizing things primarily that were cancerous. But this group in France got a bright idea to embolize these benign tumors, fibroids, prior to hysterectomy, because we knew that the reason why we're embolizing these tumors and cutting off the blood supply to them was to make it an easier surgery for the surgeon to remove. So in France, they said, well, even though these aren't cancer, the fibroids, we can embolize them, cut the blood supply off, and make it an easier hysterectomy for women. The difference, the important difference being, when I embolize a tumor here in this country, they're right off to surgery.
Yes.
But in France, they have a socialized medical system.
Okay.
And so these women were waiting 6, 7, 8 weeks for their elective hysterectomy. So they were embolized and they were waiting. Well, what happened after 6, 7, 8 weeks go by, the women's symptoms, they were embolized and the women's symptoms were disappearing. So they called up their gynecologist and they said, look, I feel great. Do I need that hysterectomy?
Exactly.
And enough women did that where they had to look at it. And so the gynecologist in France called the gynecologist, the chief of gynecology at UCLA here in this country, and said, this is pretty interesting. You better look at this. So he got Scott Goodwin, who was an interventional radiologist and colleague friend of mine.
Okay.
He got him to do the first woman just embolize alone and he published his first series of 11 patients in 1995.
Okay.
And we've been doing it ever since. It's been a tremendous procedure. It's one of the biggest breakthroughs for women. The problem is women unfortunately need to know about it.
Yes, and that's why we have you on the show tonight, because you guys need to know about this UFE procedure, and that's uterine fibroid embolization.
Yes, uterine fibroid embolization, or some people call it uterine artery embolization. That's the actual artery that we're in. They're the same procedure, UAE or UFE, it's the same.
And so you were telling me, we were talking a little bit about this before the show, that this is an outpatient
Correct.
procedure.
Outpatient, non-surgical, so there's no cutting on you. So instead of doing a hysterectomy on a woman, which is inpatient, fairly long recovery at home, and she loses her uterus, this is a outpatient, non-surgical procedure, no cutting on you. You go home the same day with just a Band-Aid at the top of your right leg.
Wow.
It's a little tiny thing that's covered by a Band-Aid. You go home with that. You go home with your uterus, which is really important.
Yes, it is.
You have about a 5 or 6 day, 7 day recovery at home, out of work for a week. And importantly, not only do you get relief of symptoms, 9 chances in 10, you get to keep your uterus, which is huge, because even though I hear all the time, well, my doctor said I really didn't need my uterus because I'm done having kids. Well, your uterus is very important to you, even in women that are not interested in having children.
Yes.
It's important for you psychologically, sexually.
Yes.
We know it's important for bone health. We know it's important now for heart health. So if you can keep your parts, they're there for more than just childbearing.
You're right. You are so right. And so you talked a little bit about women and being able to have this particular procedure. How long does it usually take to recover from? You said a few days?
Yeah, the typical recovery is about 5 days. The procedure itself only takes about 30 to 45 minutes to perform.
Okay.
And then they recover for about 5 or 6 hours and then go home.
Okay.
So they spend the day with us, but then they go home, and the average recovery is about 5 days out of work a week.
Wow, that is phenomenal, because that compared to, I know a hysterectomy is just like having a C-section. I can relate to that because I had a C-section. Yeah, so it's like at least 6 weeks. So that reduced down to a week is definitely, and you get to keep your uterus, and you get to keep, your hormones, so you're not taking all this medication to keep your hormones in balance, because that's a lot of things that people deal with when they have hysterectomies is, for one, if you do want to have children, you can't. For two, you just got that imbalance going on. So
no question.
A lot of different things going on.
We've had a number of women have children after UFE. I've had 2 sets of twins born now after.
Really? Wow.
Yep.
Isn't that something?
So it's important, as Jamie Dukes, a friend of mine who played for the Falcons for a number of years, said, keep your stuff. That's you got to tell them. You say, keep your stuff. That's it. That's
I'm
important.
going to make sure to keep my stuff. I tell you that. So, all right. So talking about fibroids, we talked about some of the symptoms. Why are they more prevalent in African American women?
Well, it's 2 reasons. One is that it tends to run more in African American households genetically.
Okay.
So they're kind of predisposed, first of all. Second, it also has to do with body fat. We don't know what causes fibroids. Nobody does.
Okay.
But we know that they grow with estrogen stimulation. That's why they tend to grow during pregnancy, sometimes very rapidly, and why they tend not to be an issue for women in menopause. Estrogen is stored in fat. It's a secondary source in body fat. So the more body fat you have on you, the more stimulated your fibroid. So if you look at racially, body fat distribution, African American number one, Latino, then Caucasian, then Asian. And that's the distribution of fibroids also. So part of it is genetic. And you can't do anything, you can't pick your parents, you can't do anything about that. But everybody can try to be as close to their ideal body weight, lose that extra body fat. It's good for your heart health, and now it's good for your fibroid health.
Yes, yes, definitely. And so we talked a little bit about diet and how diet can play even into if you have fibroids, if they'll grow, if they'll shrink, different things like that. So over your studies and over the years, have you seen the difference?
Definitely. We will try to get people first. The first and easiest thing is to try to change their diet and health patterns. Exercise more. As I say, try to lose that extra body fat, try to be more toward their ideal weight. We'll implement an anti-estrogen strategy because we know that estrogen kind of stimulates, so we want to do anti-estrogen. Well, one of the ways you can do it is through foods. There are certain foods that are kind of anti-estrogenic foods. There are colored vegetables that are really good, and they have a lot of what are called flavonoids in them. And flavonoids interfere with the estrogen pathway in making estrogen. So they block an important enzyme. So the more colored vegetables in your diet, it's also in red wine and chocolate. That's some of my vices, but
mine too.
Yeah, so,
I think I got some French in me.
right. So that it's all good. It's all in moderation.
Yes.
So there are certain dietary things that you can do. There are certain soys, for instance, that have phytoestrogens in them, plant-derived estrogens, that will compete for the same estrogen receptors. And so again, another way to kind of interfere and try to block estrogen. So if you can get rid of or at least moderate the amount of red meat, dairy, and chicken, those are the three big offenders. I mean, there's so much hormones in the food supply in general. You can't eliminate hormones, but the big offenders are red meat, chicken, and dairy. And if you can kind of, in moderation, do that and do some of these other dietary things, you will definitely make your symptoms better.
Wow, that is phenomenal. I mean, these are just little things that people can do on their own,
Absolutely.
actually, even before they get to a doctor. But you also talked about this can go on for a number of years.
Yes.
Without people even realizing it, right, or noticing it.
Yeah, well, it kind of creeps up on you over time, and the heavy periods, you could never lose the amount of blood that a lot of my patients lose all at once. You wouldn't survive. But they have these heavy periods month after month after month, and it creates kind of a deficit, like our government with money. We have these patients will have this deficit with iron and hemoglobin. They're putting out more blood than they can replace, and so they get more tired and weaker. They get signs of anemia, more blood loss, and they can't replace it. So the signs of anemia are being tired or weak, particularly during their menstrual. They may get lightheaded or dizzy. They might get headaches. They might chew or crave ice. That's a very common thing. They might get migraine-like headaches. I've seen patients that were on migraine medicine for years. They had fibroids. We just fixed their fibroids. They didn't need any migraine medicine.
Exactly.
They just needed to have their anemia treated.
Wow, that's awesome. And we have a little video clip of one of Dr. Lipman's patients. So let's take a quick look.
Hi, my name is Michelle Cox, and I'm very, very pleased with my UFE experience with Dr. Lipman. It has completely changed my life. I was severely anemic for a year and almost could have died a year ago on Thanksgiving Day, and we had to rush to the ER, and I had to have a blood transfusion, 4 units of blood. I suffered greatly with profuse bleeding every month, and it was just ruining my life. I went to 3 gynecologists, and of course they were wonderful people, but they wanted me to have a hysterectomy. One gyno said that I needed a major abdominal surgery to take my uterus out, and I wanted to keep my uterus. I believe it is important for a woman. It's an integral part of our body, and I feel as women we have that right to seek other options. That's why I'm sharing with you. Please search out UFE for yourself. Consult with Dr. Lipman. It has been a blessing. My anemia is going away. I have energy. I have normal menstrual cycles, and I kept my uterus. And I want you to do that for yourself. Seek the options. See what is out there for you. consult Dr. Lipman and look into UFE. And I wish you the best, and I hope your story ends as well as mine. Thank you.
Wow, that was awesome. That was awesome. And so she was, how long was she dealing with that? For years?
Years,
it sounds like.
yeah. And there was a study that was published at the end of 2013. It was a study in the OBGYN literature that looked at over 1,000 women that were suffering with fibroids. And the average time for them to be suffering with it, the mean time was 3.5 years, with a quarter of them over 5 years suffering with this. In fact, over 1 million women are on this sideline. We call them the silent sufferers. They don't want surgery. They don't want to lose their uterus, and I don't blame them. So they just pad themselves up and kind of deal with it. It's miserable. It's not living. It's suffering. But they don't want surgery, and they don't know of any other option. They don't know about UFE, and their physician hasn't told them about it, even though they know. And so they just kind of suffer with it, and it's unfortunate. We could do a lot more good if people would know about this, and I appreciate you having me. This is one of the reasons why we're trying to get the word out there.
Yes, definitely. And so as far as women, say for instance, if they're dealing with infertility, how does that affect it, or does it help it? Does it not help it?
Fibroids can interfere with any part of the fertility pathway, from trying to get pregnant to keeping a pregnancy to changing the type of delivery, to cause all sorts of havoc. It can cause miscarriages, it can block the tubes, and it can do everything in the fertility pathway from conception to delivery. UFE is really restricted to dealing with patients that are having fibroid issues with significant symptoms. Now, some of those patients may want to have children, but you're not treating just the patient that is infertile because of the fibroid. That's kind of a separate. So UFE is really for women that are having significant symptoms from their fibroids, and they may or may not be interested in future fertility.
So are there different type of fibroids? It sounds like there are different types of fibroids.
There are 3 main types of fibroids based on location in the uterus. There are ones that are the kind of on the lining of the uterus. That's the most central, right next to the cavity. The uterus is obviously hollow. So the ones that are up against the lining, the most central fibroids, those are called submucosal. Those are the ones that cause the heavy bleeding. There are the ones farthest away from the cavity on the outer part of the uterus. Those are called subserosal. Those cause bulk-related symptoms. They press on things because they're on the outer part of the uterus. Press on the bladder, press on pelvic nerves, and so forth. Then the third type is in between, the intramural. Now, depending on which way they grow, they can, if they grow towards the cavity, they'll tend to cause more bleeding issues. If they grow outwardly, they'll tend to cause more bulk. Or if they grow in both directions, they'll cause both.
Wow.
So either or both.
Yes, and I've heard of people dealing with both.
Oh yeah, we usually see all Usually we see all 3 varieties in most women. Now,
is there one that should be seen faster than another one, or is it
not really? Although the submucosal ones, because the bleeding that's the symptom for those, they tend to present earlier. And if you have like ones that are on the outer part of the uterus, they could get very large without really causing a lot of symptoms, so they tend to present later.
And I've heard of fibroids getting so large as like a melon.
Yes,
melon
cantaloupes,
size.
Melons, you can see them that large.
Wow.
They know that they're what's going on. They just don't want surgery, and so they just kind of, again, suffer with it, and these benign tumors will tend to grow over time and get bigger and bigger, and say, gynecologists will describe them as a certain size pregnancy. Well, she's up to her belly button. That's a 16-week. That's a 4-month pregnancy. Over her belly button, 20 weeks, 24 weeks,
So tell me a little bit about the procedure.
Okay.
I know they probably want to hear, okay, this is, if I have something that size in me, right, how are you going to take that out? I know what I would want to know.
Well,
I get to go home the same day.
Right. Well, we're not taking anything out.
Okay.
So we're doing everything from the inside.
All right.
So the access point is at the top of your right leg where you feel your pulse. That's our entry point into the body. A cardiologist may use that if you had a heart attack and they wanted to study your heart arteries, they would come up the same way, or sometimes they go in the radial artery from your wrist. We use the top of the right leg. That's just our entry point into the body. And we were going to go into the pelvic arteries. There's a uterine artery on each side. So we will select one uterine at a time, And then the catheter that I use is the size of a piece of angel hair pasta. It's tiny. The guide wire that it goes over is 16,000th of an inch. So it's like a human hair. And I'm directing this catheter inside each uterine artery separately, and then the uterine artery branches like a tree, getting smaller and smaller branches till you get out to the leaves of the tree. That's where the fibroids are. Those are at the kind of the end of the tree, the tiniest of branches, and I know what size they are, so I can flow direct these particles to cut off the blood supply to every fibroid in the uterus. So it doesn't matter how many you have, how big they are, I can get them all and just go in one uterine artery at a time. So I've heard patients say, well, you know, I actually talked to my doctor about UFE, but he told me I had too many fibroids. Well, that's silly, or too big. It doesn't matter if you have one big leaf or 100 leaves on the tree. I can take care of them either way.
Wow. And so once you cut off the blood supply, then it shrinks.
Right, they soften and shrink. Instead of these hard, firm, rock-like tumors, they're smaller, softer kind of bags of water.
Okay.
So they don't have to disappear. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they shrink dramatically. Sometimes they shrink modestly. But as long as they're dead, they will never bother the woman ever again.
Wow.
And if she's over 40, it's likely the only thing she'll ever need ever again. If she's younger, she might grow new fibroids because a 30-ish-year-old woman may have 15, 20 years of menstruation left to menopause. So over a long time horizon, she might need a second procedure. But that even then is not common.
Okay. And so over the years, you've been doing this, Howard?
About 20 years now.
20 years. About how many procedures could you think of that you may have done?
Well, we're way over 5,000, probably on the order of 6,000 of these procedures.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. This is a beautiful thing, and I believe this is something that a lot of people need to hear more about. If they want to get in touch with you, if they want to hear more about the procedure or your office, where would they need to go, or what would they need to
website has a lot of information. We have two websites, gotfibroids.com, that's easy, gotfibroids.com, or my practiced initials, ATL, like short for Atlanta, and then the letter I twice.
Okay.
ATLII.com, that's another website of ours. And then our office number is area code 770-953-2600.
Now, I know you have counterparts in other countries, probably even throughout the United States, that do the same procedure.
Correct.
So if people, when you have people all over listening to the show, if they're not locally in the area, how can they find out who practices this or who does this procedure in their area?
Two answers to that. One is if they wanted to come and see us, and I see patients from all over the globe. We see a lot of patients from Africa, the Caribbean. We had a patient about a month ago from New Zealand. So people will travel for, it was all throughout the Southeast.
That's true.
So they can come and see us, but the easiest way to find someone in their area, I'm an interventional radiologist. So the Society of Interventional Radiology is the national society. So if they go to sirweb.org, so it's sirweb.org, it will come up interventional radiologist by state. They can click on their own state, and then alphabetically by city, they will see physicians like myself that can perform this.
Wow, this is phenomenal. This is great. And so we talked about recovery period. We talked about infertility. I guess what are the advantages and the disadvantages? Because I know this could be tricky, right, just going into this particular procedure.
Well, the advantages are easy. This is safer than surgery, much safer. There's no general anesthesia. The anesthetic is IV and local.
Okay.
So there's no general anesthesia. It's much safer than surgery, much less invasive, obviously, than surgery. There's no cutting on you. Done as an outpatient, go home with a Band-Aid. So it's safer, less invasive, less expensive, shorter recovery. You get to keep all your parts. So those are all the advantages. Disadvantages, if you had a hysterectomy, it's 100% cures the problem. Because if you don't have any fibroids, and you don't have your uterus either, which is a problem, so that is a positive for hysterectomy. It's 100%, but the success rate for UFE in my hands is over 90%.
Wow.
So you're sacrificing for a few little percent. I mean, the ability to keep your uterus.
Yes.
That's enormous.
That says a lot. And like the young lady was saying in her testimonial, being able to keep your uterus as a woman.
Oh.
I mean, that's that's the womb.
Right.
So like you said, even if you're not bearing children, still it does other things for the body.
Absolutely. The uterus, I feel, is very undervalued, and it's surprising by physicians, even female physicians, which is really surprising. You'd think they would have a little bit more empathy for their, uterus, because the uterus is more important than just simple childbearing. It's important for women psychologically, sexually, bone health, heart health. It has other important functions, and there is no need in the world to be doing a hysterectomy when you have such less invasive options. Okay, if you try all of these options and you're still suffering and things aren't working, okay, hysterectomy is there. It's an option. But in my opinion, that should be the absolute last resort, versus most commonly today, not always, but most commonly, it is the first and only option given, even though UFE has been around a long time. Very safe, very effective, proven in the medical literature. This isn't anything new or experimental.
Exactly. And so we were giving out some numbers. I was just reading a little bit about some of what's going on here in the Atlanta area. 1 million African American women in the Atlanta area.
Wow.
Can you give us just some other kind of stats and facts that we should know?
Stats, it's the most common, the second most common surgery performed in the United States is hysterectomy, which is staggering because half the population isn't even eligible for the procedure.
Exactly.
So it's the second most common surgery done, hysterectomy is, and the most common reason why it's done is not cancer. Like if you have uterine cancer, hysterectomy is appropriate, no question, but not for benign tumors. That's really not appropriate in my opinion. And the other thing was, the average age of a woman undergoing hysterectomy is less than 40. So these are young women losing their womb. So we've got to stop that.
Yes, we definitely do. Well, Dr. Lipman, thank you so much again for coming on the show.
My pleasure.
And you guys can hear also more about Got Fibroids at our upcoming Health, Wellness, and Empowerment Conference. It's the 3rd annual Essence of a Woman Health, Wellness, and Empowerment Conference. They will be there.
Indeed.
And they will have more information. You can get literature. You can actually talk with those that will be there. And it will be at the Morrow Center at South Lake Mall, and that's 1180 South Lake Circle in Morrow, Georgia. For more information, you can go to the website, which is www.theessenceconference.com. It's free and open to the public, so come on out. Again, thank you, and we're going to continue to spread the word.
Great.
Thank you guys for tuning in. Until next time, ciao.